Hi and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to the new subscribers. In today's video I'm going to show you how I made up a cadaver tomb for a storm giant, and it's got a little surprise for you when you open it up. This is one of those things where I got inspired watching one of my favorite YouTube channels, Ask a Mortician. She did a vlog on her trip over to a church out in England where they have a few of these cadaver tombs, and that sort of triggered the whole inspiration for making this one. Now the fun thing is that this is using some supplies from Dollar General and Dollar Tree, so hopefully it's still accessible for you guys out there. Anyways, you know the deal. Any questions, ask them down below and I'll do my best to answer them for you. As always, have fun with it. Thanks very much. See you later. This particular skeleton I got from a pack of 4 large skeletons hanging on some twine at Dollar General. And what you're going to do is pretty much take him apart. So even though he's fun to play with, we're going to disassemble him. First thing you want to do is pop off his head. And you just do that with a quick yank, just like that. The nice thing is that the rib cage is also just snapped onto the spine, so you can just pull that one off no problem as well. Once you do that, you're going to want to get a pair of snippers or nippers, whatever you choose to call them, and nip off the legs because the balls are too large on the other side to pull it through the pelvis without doing something to the pelvis bone, which you don't want to do. So snip off the legs, and that's going to free them up from the skeleton base, just like that. And then you're going to start moving on to getting the arms off of the rib cage. Same thing, use your nippers and snip those guys off, which isn't too hard to do. So that frees up the arms. Your next step is going to be to free the spine away from the pelvic bone. And again, just cut that out. It doesn't have to be exact because we are going to be doing something with the back of the pelvic bone. Right now we just want to get the spine pulled off of it. So now you have that freed from the spine. This is the point we're going to start cutting the bones so they all lie flat now. First thing I started with was the skull, and in this case I used my pair of old kitchen shears. Make sure they're not a good pair of kitchen shears. Check with the cook of the kitchen if it's okay to use them first. But I find that these clip through this particular plastic a lot easier than the nippers did because they have a narrower top to them. So basically cut the back of the skull off, just like that. And the next thing we're going to address is the rib cage. Now on the side of the rib cage you'll see these markings from the molding, and I kind of use those as my guide for cutting away the back of the rib cage, so it's going to end up looking something like that. Again, take the kitchen shears, cut it apart, snip off any uneven pieces just so it lies a little bit better. It's not as critical though because we are going to smush this into foam. So there you go with the rib cage now completely set and ready to go. The other thing I did is for the little bits of plastic that were hanging between the ribs, I used a metal nail file and used it to file away any of the things that were sort of dangling and hanging around the rib cage area. Next step is taking the pelvis and again cutting off the back part so that the pelvis will lie flat. In this case, do use your nippers because this is a thicker piece of plastic. The shears did not cut through it well at all. But the point is to get it to lie flat like that as best you can. The final step is to cut the joints away at both the elbows and the knees. In this case, I'm just showing you on the one leg because it's the same concept for everything else. So basically you want to divide the arms and legs into 2 separate parts. But then with the legs, you want to make sure you cut off that back part bone of the foot, again, so that will lie nice and flat. At this point, I started prepping the tomb's top. So in this case, I cut out a piece of the Dollar Tree foam board, and it was about 7 inches by 3 inches. But what I wanted to do was bevel the edges because I wanted to have that round off, worn stone look to it. So as you can see here, just carefully go through and bevel your edges and make sure you get it on all 4 sides to bevel them. And then what I did was take my metal nail file again and smooth out any jagged edges, and again it also gave it some more weathering. The next thing you're going to do is attach the top of the tomb to a piece of cardboard. I used a cereal box, and in this case use a glue stick, smear it up really well, and then place the tomb cover on top of where the glue is. Make sure to wiggle around a little bit just to spread it out, and let that dry with a book on top of it to weigh it down to make sure it adheres nicely and sticks well. Next, you'll use your Xacto knife to cut the cardboard away from the larger piece of cardboard. You're going to run your Xacto knife along the edge of the tomb top and make sure you keep it close so that when it's cut away, you'll have a nice, smooth, cohesive edge. Then what I did is I peeled off the back piece of print to the cereal box, and it gave a nice bit of a rough texture to the back of the tomb cover, which when you paint it up, gives it a really nice effect as well. You don't have to do this step, but I did want to show it. To continue on with this, what you're going to do is first lay the skeleton out in the position you want it to be on top of the tomb. Then what you do is keep the skull in position and press down because it'll leave an imprint on the foam. When you see that imprint, you can then take your hot glue gun and attach the skull where you have that imprint, and you can then start moving on, building up the skeleton from skull to spine to pelvis, then putting on the legs and the upper portions of the arms. However, you do want to wait on putting the forearms on because there's going to be a technique that happens between those two parts. You're also going to want to make sure that you take the sword you're going to use for this and just double check its size against your skeleton. As long as everything lines up, you're good to go. Now here's where the fun begins with adding in the shroud. What you need to do is take a tissue that is 2-ply and separate it so it becomes just a 1-ply piece that you need. Then using a mix of 2 parts white glue to a part water, you're going to start daubing it onto the tissue on top of the skeleton to get it to form against the bones and show the detail. The trick to this is that you don't want to smooth everything out. You want it to have folds and creases and lumps and ridges in different spots. So I find it helps to hold the tissue loosely while you dab on the glue and water mix and work your way down the skeleton. So I just sort of draped it around and about in different forms, and you will need a pair of scissors towards the end so that you can snip off excess amounts of tissue where you don't want it to be. But just make sure that you're very careful with getting this mixture on. You don't want to take the paintbrush and smooth it down flat because it will either make the tissue tear or go flat as well. You want to be very gentle and careful with this part of the technique if you want to keep the textured look of folded fabric. As you can see here, this is where I talked about trimming off the excess tissue, which is perfectly fine. You can play around with it a little bit more and keep going with the glue and water mixture in your paintbrush, again being very gentle and careful with it. Slow and steady is the trick here. You want to be sure you're not mushing it down too much. And you also want to be careful that you don't over wet it. Too wet will make it sink in on itself. You just want it to show that it's taken on the liquid but still holds its own form. Once I got the larger piece of tissue down, I took up the snipped off and ripped up bits of the other pieces of tissue that I had and used that to add more fabric around the skull area and other zones where I wanted to see what essentially is a shroud around the skeleton placed on top of the tomb. I found for the effect it really helps to have some areas a little bit thicker in terms of the tissue coverage, as well as a lot thinner so that you see the details of the bones coming in up and underneath the tissue itself. Then you want to be sure you give the tissue and the water glue mixture plenty of time to dry so that it's stiff and it's not moving underneath your touch before you move on to the next step. Using your hot glue gun, you're going to place a dollop on the pelvic area and then also up on the sternum, and you're going to glue down your sword of choice. And once that's secure, you're then going to go in and finally glue in the forearm and hands portion. How you want to position them is completely up to you. I sort of did a little bit of a crisscross where one was on top of the handle part and one was further down on the blade. But again, this is up to you, but do make sure you use the hot glue gun for this part. What I did then is also added a little bit more tissue around the arms themselves just to heighten the shroud look of it. Again, it's up to you how and where you want to put it, but I found this gave it more of a rounded out look as opposed to just looking like the forearms were plopped down after everything else was done. While waiting for the tissue to dry on the top cover of the tomb, I took the opportunity to work on the base that the tomb itself was going to go on, as well as the sides of the tomb. Because I'm using the Dollar Tree foam board, I first did the base, which I decided to make a circular shape. That was purely my own choice. You could do a larger rectangle, you could do a square. The point is you want to have a base that's larger than the full measurement of the top of the tomb. So use that as your personal gauge. What I did was I took a bowl. So I took the bowl, cut out the circle once I traced it around, and then for the measurements of the tomb sides, you want to measure your tomb top and decide how much an overhang you want, if you want an overhang at all. Once you get that all determined, then take out your measurements. I did keep the actual height of the tomb to 1 inch, however. I do recommend keeping it to that height just for sense of scale. Once you get all your pieces cut out, what you then want to go and do is start getting things mounted onto cardboard. And again, use that glue stick, smear it around a whole bunch. And in this case, I used corrugated cardboard because I want to make sure that that base did not curl up on me whatsoever. So I put the circle down once I had the glue all spread out and around, and put a nice thick book on top and let that dry thoroughly. And while the base is drying, I then put the sides of the tomb onto, again, cereal cardboard, because it didn't need to be as thick or as wide. I wanted it to be more in line with the tomb cover. Once everything's nice and thoroughly dried, go back in with your Xacto knife and carefully cut those pieces out so that they're free and away from the cardboard that you first pasted them onto. For the sides of the tomb, what I ended up using were bits and pieces from the Dollar General $1 pack of those skeletons. Now yes, those skeletons are not to scale for Dungeons & Dragons, however when you chop them up they're really great for adding on details. So as you can see, these are the pieces I decided to use. However, the 5 skulls that were at the top I kind of nixed. They didn't do what I wanted them to do. And I know that the other issue with these is that people could not get paint to stick on them. What I ended up doing with these pieces was soaking them in an acetone bath for about 2 minutes, and I had absolutely no problem whatsoever having paint stay on them. So once you get your pieces all prepped, what you're going to do is lay them out first on top of your side pieces to decide how you want it to look. Once you have the setup as you like, you do the same thing as you did with the tomb top. Press in the pieces where they are so that you have an imprint of where they're going to go. It makes hot gluing them on so much easier. Once you get those on and the hot glue cools, you can then start putting them together, and what you'll do is take another piece of, I did a cereal box cardboard piece again, and you're going to glue them on top of that cardboard to make a box. Once again, when the hot glue is dry, you're going to go around with your Xacto knife and cut out the tomb itself from the piece of cardboard, and you'll end up with something that looks like this nice box right here. The next step is to start creating the stair effect that's going to go inside the tomb and make it look like there's a set of stairs going down into whatever it is you're deciding to have it go down into. So what you're going to do is take another piece of the Dollar Tree foam, and you are going to cut out a piece that fits inside the box. You're going to want to measure that. And then what I did is every ½ inch I drew a line to mark where a set of stairs is going to develop. The thing you want to do with these to make them look more stair-like is to sort of take a pencil and deepen where you've made those lines, because that's going to start looking like the area of the stairs where it's the vertical, not the horizontal part of the stair. So if you thicken that line up, it starts creating a shadow effect so that you start looking more like stairs. Then you also want to make sure you add in, if you decide to want to make them look like stone, the lines and everything like that and texture so they look like stone steps going down. Do a test fit, make sure it fits okay in there, and then the other thing I ended up doing to force the perspective is I did an angle cut down on either side so that the top of the stairs was wider and it gets narrower towards the bottom of the stairs. Then I glued the stairs in. After that, I ended up doing a full coating on everything of a mix of white glue, black acrylic paint, and dark brown acrylic paint, equal parts. Mix them all together and just paint everything up. And this is going to be your primer before your next paint job comes around. Here comes the fun part. I'm going to start adding a stone texture to my base, and I found this great embosser at Joann Fabrics that I'm going to use. I'm using the side where the grout is raised, so I'm pushing it around on top of the foam. It takes on the imprint, and you want to try and press down as evenly and as firmly as you can to make sure that the stones take. Now, because you are going to put the tomb in the center of this, you don't have to worry so much about the texture on the inside part of your base, but do make sure you work on your outer edges to get that stone texture. Then what I did to the base is put on that same mix that you just did on the box for the tomb. After it's dry and ready to go, I started edging the base because you could see the corrugation of the cardboard on the side. So I cut out 1/2-inch squares of the foam and ended up cutting those in half. I find it easier than trying to do 1/4-inch slices. And I use those to line around the edge of the base itself with a hot glue gun. And once the hot glue cooled, I then put on more of that mix. I did a second coat on the top and then did a coat around where I just put those bricks of foam. And you want everything to dry completely before moving on to your next step. When it comes to painting everything up to give it that stone finish, both on the tomb and the base, I did use the technique with the cosmetic sponge that I have adopted that I really like doing. If you haven't watched my live stream on painting general terrain and ice terrain, please do that because that'll show you my technique and you can see how I do these things. However, what I'm going to do here is just show you a quick little clip of pictures so you can see how the tones change as you add on each layer. First, we're going to start with these paint colors. I've lined them up in order of use. So if you take a look, you start from the left side of the photo and you move across to the right. That's the color progression. I will have these written in the description as well. So your first one is the dark brown paint, then you move on to the medium brown. After the medium brown comes the yellow, and then from that I moved on to that peach tone, then I moved on to the metallic gold, then it was moving on to suede. And at that point you need everything to dry before moving on to a black wash, which you also want to have dry completely. Same rules for the base apply when it comes to painting. Here are the paints that I used to paint up the base, so it was a darker tone of grays and everything like that of stone. And you can see in the picture here, these are the 4 colors that I started with. Again, move from left to right with your color progression. And again, I use the cosmetic sponge technique to move through each of these steps. So as you can see here in these next couple photos, as you layer on the different paints, it gives it a different look each time. And when everything is dry, once again, you are going to do a black wash, which you also want to have dry completely before moving on to the finishing steps of paint for the base as well. When the black wash is dried on the tomb pieces, what you're going to do is go back with the parchment color of paint and you are going to dry brush the top of the tomb as well as the sides of the tomb to highlight and bring out all the different textures and details that are now on the tomb and ready to go. Once you do that, you're going to be amazed at the difference it makes and the way it really brings out the fabric texture of the top and the skeletal pieces on the sides. And don't forget, you're also going to want to take that parchment and dry brush the base as well. Now it's time to focus on the interior part of the tomb. And this is where you're going to start forcing that perspective to make those flat pieces of foam look like stairs going down into the depths of whatever. And you start with a black coat of paint around the bottom, and then what I did is I slowly graduated from a black to a lighter black to a lighter black than that by adding in a little bit of white each time I went to move up to a different step. So eventually it ended up being a very light gray at the top. From there, what I did is sort of the same concept. I worked a darker gray up to a lighter gray towards the top of the box edge. However, what you're going to do is angle the line of this gray gradient to make it look deeper and deeper as you go further and further down. So there's a picture of that right there for you so you can have a reference to look at. Now the one thing I did notice is that it helps to make sure you do a black wash so you can bring out all those details of the stairs, as well as just to do a true black along the shadowed part, because that's what really seals the deal to make those steps look like they're going down, 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 down on the foam piece itself. The other thing I noticed after doing the paint on the bottom and the sides is that the black paint, even though it was black, it was still reflecting light back up and it wasn't giving the trick of the eye like I wanted. So what I ended up doing was taking a scrap piece of black fleece that I had. You can also use black felt for this part. And I cut out pieces that fit on the bottom so that the light would absorb into that and wouldn't be reflected black back. And then that gave me the true black that I wanted. So again, those stairs look like they're going down deep into something else. Then for some extra fun, I took some hot glue webbing technique, you can see that in my blood and guts video, and I made some webs so that I could cut out pieces and put those in the corners and really wherever else I thought it'd be kind of fun to put some spider webs into the tomb to make it look like it hasn't been entered in a very long time. And the best way to attach these snipped out pieces that you want to your tomb is to put a very thin coat of hot glue on, let it cool just a little bit, and then press the hot glue webbing up against that and it should stick for you. Do not put it on when it is still fresh and very hot, otherwise you will melt your webs. Okay, now shocker part, I did end up using some flocking on this piece because I wanted it to have a moss grown look to it, again because I want this to be a very old looking tomb. So I took the flocking that I had and I glued it on using just some plain old white glue and allow that to dry completely. And after that, what I did is I took my Mod Podge, making sure it was the matte variety, and I put a thinned amount of that on top of the flocking to keep it where it needs to be on the top, because some of it was shedding off the top after using the glue to get it onto the piece initially. Once that has dried out as well, then you can start moving on to putting on some little plastic plant pieces that I had found over at Michael's in these sheets, and I put a few around the base area to make it look like there were, you know, saplings or bushes starting to grow out from between the stonework, and again to give it the older, ancient look. I'm also showing you some different angles of where I put the moss, just to give you an idea of how you can spread it around and scatter it, just to give it a nice balance of the moss and plants on your base and on the edges of the bottom of your tomb. When everything is completely dry and you are totally done, then make sure you do a protective coat of finish, however it is you choose to do it, whether you want to do a spray paint, just make sure you stay away and don't hold the spray can very close to your piece. Distance is your friend with those suckers. Or you can do a layer of a matte Mod Podge, which is the direction I decided to go in personally. It's up to you. But I wanted to share the final results photos with you in this little clip as well, so here you go. Thank you so much for watching this video. As always, I appreciate your coming over and checking things out. If you haven't, make sure you subscribe, and if you haven't hit the notification bell, make sure you do that as well. Have a great one. Any questions, please feel free to ask me. Thank you so much, and goodbye. Alright, you guys gonna be quiet for me for a little bit? And if you want, you guys can come and record something after. Okay? Okay. Okay. Promise? Yes. Promise. Alright.